Venezuela's vanishing gasoline, when fuel is cheaper than water and still worth smuggling. In Venezuela, it costs more to cry about gas than to buy it. Welcome to Weird Geo Economy, the channel where economics stops making sense and starts getting real. Today, we're heading into the chaos-fueled world of Venezuela, a country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, where for years you could fill up your entire tank for less than the price of a bottle of Coke. And yet, somehow, gasoline still gets smuggled, hoarded, and fought over like a war prize. Even free fuel can burn your country to the ground. We're across Venezuela's western and southern borders, especially Zulia, Táchira, Apure, Bolivar, and the long, porous lines between Venezuela and Colombia, Brazil, and Guyana. At the height of the crisis, state-owned petrol stations in Caracas charged less than 1 cent per liter for gasoline. Meanwhile, just across the border in Colombia, the same liter sold for over $1. The result? A nation flooded with cheap, heavily subsidized fuel became the center of one of the most bizarre and profitable smuggling operations in the hemisphere, because Venezuelans were literally smuggling something they had too much of. This is Venezuela's fuel paradox, a bizarre reality where the country with some of the cheapest gasoline on earth also faced gas shortages, long lines at stations, and organized fuel smuggling networks exporting fuel to its neighbors for insane markups. How did this happen? Venezuela's government, under Chavez and later Maduro, froze domestic fuel prices for years, turning gas into a symbolic public good. This created an artificially low domestic price, sometimes cheaper than drinking water or a single egg. Meanwhile, fuel in Colombia, Brazil, and the Caribbean fetched market prices, up to 100 times higher. Smuggling fuel became a no-brainer. Fill up in Venezuela, cross the border, sell it, or trade it for dollars, food, or medicine. At its peak, entire economies in Colombian border towns were powered by contraband Venezuelan gasoline, sold in roadside jugs, barrels, and repurposed Coca-Cola bottles. Because Venezuela's economic collapse turned the oil wealth into a curse, and the fuel subsidy system into a smuggler's paradise. The fuel was nearly free for several reasons. Populism. Fuel subsidies were a core promise of the Bolivarian Revolution, symbolic of socialist wealth distribution. Currency collapse. As the Bolivar lost value, the fixed fuel price meant it became almost comically cheap, fueling arbitrage. Institutional rot. PDVSA, Venezuela's once proud oil company, collapsed under corruption and mismanagement, unable to refine, transport, or even pump sufficient gasoline. Criminal economies, cartels, border mafias, and military factions began to control fuel smuggling routes, protecting the system because it became more lucrative than drugs. Ironically, Venezuela began importing gasoline from Iran and elsewhere, while its own fuel was leaving the country illegally in tanks, trucks, and backpacks. This black market fuel economy involved multiple players: ordinary citizens who waited 8 to 12 hours in line at petrol stations just to fill up and resell gas in secret; smugglers who crossed borders daily with modified vehicles, fuel tanks hidden in seats, or motorcycles loaded with containers; military officials, many of whom were complicit or directly involved, taxing smugglers at checkpoints or running their own fuel mafias; border communities where gas became currency, traded for groceries, medicine, and even school tuition; international partners like Iran, which sent fuel convoys to Venezuela while the country's own fuel was being drained out illegally. At its most dystopian, some people in Venezuela couldn't find fuel to drive to work, while their country was shipping subsidized gas into the black market next door. full tank of gas in 2019 cost less than a single peanut candy bar. But resold across the border, it could fund an entire week's groceries. In some towns, people faked border crossings multiple times per day, bribing guards, just to run gasoline back and forth for profit. The Venezuelan military created its own internal fuel distribution zones, effectively treating gasoline like an internal export, with its own pricing, mafias, and turf wars. In Venezuela, the value of gasoline isn't about barrels or oil futures. It's about how broken a country can become when economic logic collapses completely. A resource that should empower prosperity became fuel for black markets, corruption, and desperation. This isn't just a story of cheap gas. It's a story of how distorted incentives can weaponize even abundance, and how a nation with more oil than Saudi Arabia can end up begging for Iranian fuel while its own citizens queue for hours or flee with barrels strapped to bicycles. Subscribe to Weird Geo Economy for more stories that prove once again, in a broken system, even free fuel can burn your country to the ground.